So a lot of people are interested in simulation hypothesis. Most of my academic philosophy friends are like, why are you still banging on about the simulation hypothesis? I'm like, do you know anyone in computer science? Do you know anyone over in physics? Like, there's like a whole cult of people who are all obsessed with it. And if you're in philosophy of religion, man, talking about the simulator, is that God? Are we speaking univocally, analogically? All that abstruse, obscure philosophy of language that we use in theology, that's really important now for simulation hypothesis. So I want to have you on so I can get some crossbreeding. I want them to listen to your stuff and see, like, there are a lot of people talking about fundamental reality who are not philosophers, and if you're wise, you'll read their stuff and connect with them and get the conversation going.
Yeah, when it comes to the simulation hypothesis, I have plenty of writing on this. Like I write my own notes on plenty of subjects, though they're disparate, and so I wouldn't be able to pull them up, at least not cohesively right now. But by the way, David Chalmers, his gift is classification, and I think that's his secret, and he doesn't even realize it. The reason why people are drawn to him is because he just says, look, there are 3 classes of so-and-so phenomenon. There's class A, class B, class C. I think it boils down to that. And that's actually difficult to do. Anyhow, the simulation hypothesis seems to me to be these godless people trying to find God. It's like they're developing a whole framework about why something exists, and they're also putting off the question because why does the simulator exist? There are several premises that have to all be true in order for the simulation hypothesis to be true. You also have to, it's also people making claims, like philosophers or computer scientists making claims about physical systems without showing how one can derive a physical system from a computational framework. There's also some no-go theorems about the laws of physics being computational. So here's one fun one. If you have a billiard ball set, so like a pool table, and you knock one of the billiard balls, and you let it bounce around a couple times, yeah, you can plan that trajectory. But if you want to plan it 10 moves ahead, it turns out someone waving their arm in Wisconsin influences the billiard ball's trajectory. Forget about quantum mechanics. Definitely with quantum mechanics, but it influences it. Okay, if you want to go somewhere out to 20, I think it's technically 17, but let's even say 20 for sure. 20 ball bounces around this billiard table. The position of the ball, which side it hits on the billiard table, depends on the position of an electron at the edge of the observable universe. And that position's not even defined. So to think that what physics is doing is somehow computational, to me, seems to be a large assumption. And there are also there's experimental bounds as to the digital nature of physics, to how much is space something discrete, the discreteness of space. And yet they're making claims there. And then they would say, so there's so many claims. And then also, why isn't this heaven? That's something that I want to know. Like, it's a question that no one asks about the simulation hypothesis. If the simulation hypothesis is the case, why isn't this heaven? Okay, well, why does that matter, Curt? Why would it be heaven? Well, do you think, usually the people who are of the computer scientist types who come up with this argument, do you think that being more rational leads to us being more enlightened? They generally do. I don't, but they generally do. So you would think that this person who made this computer would be more rational than us, yet why don't they fall prey to the same problem of evil? So are we saying that we're then simulated by something evil? There's a deep quote about this by Nietzsche, King Midas. There's something he wrote about King Midas. Nietzsche said this, and it's a quote I think about on at least a weekly basis. He said, King Midas said to this demon, or to the devil, you can even call it the devil in this case. So King Midas says to this devil, please tell us the most best and desirable thing of all. And then the devil stood there shrill and motionless and let out a laugh, saying, "O miserable ephemeral race, children of hazard and hardship, why do you force me to say what would be so much better for you not to hear? The best of all things would be for you to not have been born, to not be, to be nothing. And the second best would be for you to soon die. Okay, so then the question is, why isn't that wrong? Like, can you rationally give me an argument as to why that's not the case? Some people do think that's the case, especially people who believe in the problem of evil and problem of suffering. This world is so horrible that if they had an on-off switch, they would press the off button because it's not worth it.
Yeah. This mentality is very big on Instagram. I've noticed in Instagram philosophy, it's we call it antinatalism, right? But I was born without my consent, and it's easy for many people just to just hand wave them away, and those are just people in their kid's basement. But I met someone like this at my church, and he came out of Eastern Orthodoxy, but he was saying he loves his kids too much to have them. He had this woman. They were living together. They were engaged or something, and they were going to get married. And we ended up talking about kids. And he's like, "Yeah, just this world's too hard. It's too like I love them too much to let them experience this world." And I'm like, "Man, like there's a whole thing about
that's the Oedipal mother."
Yeah. Well, I was studying analytic philosophy at the time, so my mind was going to like designators and like what are you referring to if there's a non-existent child? Like, what do you mean? Like your sperm and her egg? So I was getting all there instead of being a human being and trying to flesh out the sentiment behind that. It was a really fascinating conversation. But all that to say, this is a real thing that people are struggling with. But yeah, like somehow we got here from the assumptions of the simulation hypothesis. Sorry, I cut you off. I just wanted to throw that in that story.
Oh, I don't even. Well, it's to speak on the simulation hypothesis and being born. That's something else that's not covered. What does it mean to be born in the simulation? Like, how do you know when you come into being? That's a deep question. When does something come into get its own consciousness in the simulation hypothesis? Are you some other disembodied consciousness somewhere? Does that mean there's a soul? Does that mean that we're like the Matrix and there's a real version of us somewhere else? Also, how do you know that you can recursively do the simulation? So they say, well, look, of all the there's some argument of probability of, well, the simulation is likely to happen, and once you can simulate again. How do you know you can just recursively simulate? How do you know it doesn't break down at the first layer, such that the first layer can't simulate another layer? Or the nth layer can't simulate an n plus 1th layer? Like, it's not clear to me that you can just simulate all the way down. And then another issue with this is I've lost it.
Well, you were mentioning. I'll give you some time to think here.
Oh yes.
You got it.
Okay,
if you got it, jump back in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why is what's simulated not considered as real? So, for instance, we have a computer and it simulates something like Grand Theft Auto, and then we think, okay, well, the character is simulated. So then we think, okay, let's simulate the thoughts of the character in Grand Theft Auto. And do we say that that's less real to the CPU as the character itself? To the CPU, it's all just bits and zeros and ones. And if we think this is all information, then what makes some information more real than some other information? That's not clear. It's not defined. At least it's not made explicit. And so all of these thoughts of we're simulated, okay, and then thus we are not real, okay. There's so many question marks that come up in my head. And these are just statements that are thrown around.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is actually, I started thinking about the simulation hypothesis as something to destroy, because I worked in campus ministry and I meet with college athletes and we talk about Weltanschauungs, and we talk about many of them are Christians who want to know what they believe and why they believe it, or if they believe it. They're going to college for the first time, and it's like, I'm on my own. How do I even read the Bible? What do I think about it? And a lot of people would throw up the simulation hypothesis all the time. So I thought, this is something I need to knock down. And then after years of thinking about it, I was like, look, this is a jumping off point for people who would otherwise not be interested in philosophy or fundamentality or fundamental physics or theology, people who are turned off by those words, but who are doing those things when they're considering the simulation hypothesis. So instead of me trying to steer the conversation away from it, I steer right in now. And hey, if we lived in a computer simulation, would we have free will? What do you think? Would we be real? What's the difference between base reality particles, of which this desk is made up of, and it and bit, and zeros and ones?
Gateway philosophy.
Yeah, right. So now I see it as a way to lure them in. I'm trying to convince my philosopher friends who, right now in philosophy, the trend is public-facing philosophy. And I went from just some dummy with a podcast to someone who knows how to do public-facing philosophy. It's like, no, yeah, I guess. Just now, because it's a cool trend, because you have words to describe it, you want to jam your abstruse philosophy into the public's eye. But if you really want to do public-facing philosophy, you'll take your work in epistemology and you'll apply it to things like the simulation hypothesis in the ways that you were just doing, and asking questions of it. Hey, here's this hypothesis. How could we know that we were in a simulation? Here's some of my work. Here's something that I've done. Here's how I can add to the conversation and add to public understanding and help you think about it for yourself. So I'm like, this is my gong. I'm just clanging this. Like, we should be thinking.
Do you find there to be a through line between the people who believe in the simulation hypothesis and those who don't? So what I mean to say is, are those who don't, they tend to be Hindu, or they tend to come from the upper states? I don't know. But I'm saying, is there some commonality between people who believe in it and people who don't that you've noticed?
What I've noticed is kind of what you were saying earlier. It's people who want to believe in providence without God. So on the popular level, in the philosophical realm, it's actually a really fascinating question. Like, you talk about Chalmers being good at categorization, and he really is. In his book Reality Plus, I thought this is just a ploy to get more people to read the book, and I read the book myself. I'm like, this is very good. And he talks about pure sims and biosims, a question you were asking. A pure sim is someone who's wholly simulated. A biosim is someone like in the Matrix who has reality outside, who's being deceived. I would call that deception, because they think they live in base reality, but they don't. And in that case, I've come up with some of my own self-defeat arguments for, you may be in the simulation, but you couldn't know that you are, so you can't believe that. And so what I've found is many people who want to, on the popular level, they want to affirm, they love the word synchronicity, right? They love from Jung, synchronicity. Are you familiar with the word, actually? Yeah, I thought you were. I thought I've heard you say it before. But for those who don't, it's coincidence, or, Jung was talking with this lady and she had a dream of a scarab beetle. And then as she was saying the dream out loud to him in a session, a beetle was scratching at the window, and he goes, "There's your scarab beetle." And like, the analytic philosopher in me is like, well, that was definitely not a scarab beetle, because those are from Egypt and this was not in Egypt. But it's a metaphor. And the world lined up in a certain way, was synchronous in a certain way to bring about this like deja vu, or this feeling of providential control. So that's what I've seen. And I've seen it especially in the West with people who've grown up in religious homes who didn't really know what they believe, whose parents didn't teach them, didn't indoctrinate them, didn't give them the teaching. So they go, look, why would I believe this stuff? But of course, I believe everything happens for a reason. So if it's not God, then it looks like it's a simulation. We probably live in a simulation. Why did Donald Trump win the 2016 election? It looked like he totally wasn't. Well, because the simulators wanted to see what would happen if the madman won the election. I heard that so much. And of course, on the philosophical level, folks like Nick Bostrom says, I don't think you could have any positive evidence that you do, because the simulators, if they didn't want you to find out, they could always just run it back or scrub your brain. And
why would the simulators allow us to even question it? So why are they allowing, like, if there's a hiddenness to them, should they exist? So why not be fully hidden? What do you think?
So there's this guy Rizvan Verk, who has written a popular level book called The Simulation Hypothesis. He's a computer programmer. He goes in for like this is syncretism in religions, where he wants to unify. Syncretism is unifying all religions. He wants to say, look, this has been here the whole time, and we're progressing towards enlightenment. And so it's kind of a soul building theodicy. So in the philosophy of religion and what problem of evil literature, one of the theodicies, the justifications for God's allowing evil, is a soul building theodicy. God allows the evil that he does in order to build character and develop our sense of right and wrong, develop our characters, to grow us and shape us and mold us in ways that are not possible without the presence of evil. So perhaps it's our striving and reaching towards the unknown, which will turn us into the kind of things who could have a proper relationship or could properly handle that type of knowledge. Maybe if it was super obvious, we would take it for granted, or there's all sorts of ways that they could come up with. Or Muse is a band. I love Muse; they're really good. But they came up with a whole album, Simulation Theory, and that's another thing on the popular level. People call it simulation theory, and I want to do some more work on theory versus hypothesis, because I think it's a hypothesis. I don't think it's a theory, but I need to. I'm not well spoken enough on that.
An untestable hypothesis as well, at least currently.
That's what I think. People point to the double slit, and they'll be like, "Hey, look at the double slit experiment. That looks like rendering to me. When you look at it, it's rendered. When you're not looking at it, it's saving data, saving compute. And so it looks like because of fundamental physics, or I shouldn't say quantum physics. What was the word? Quantum field theory, maybe?
Yeah, but you could say quantum mechanics in that case.
So because of quantum mechanics, we have evidence that we live in a computer simulation, because anything I'm not looking at is not rendered. How do I know that? Because of the double slit experiment. When you look at it, it's a particle and it's rendered. And so these are all popular level, things that people will use to support the simulation theory.
If you enjoyed that clip, then the full podcast is out right now. You can click around here. Enjoy. Subscribe to Theories of Everything to get notified of upcoming podcasts, as there are new full-length podcasts every week on the topics of mathematics, physics, consciousness, free will, and AI.